Hey there. If you're a frequent listener to our show, you already know that our show is brought to you by our friends over at Artillery Sports. But what you may not know is that Artillery Sports helps athletes of all types win on and off the course and court. They do this by selling quality, durable, and precision manufactured sports equipment that keeps you in the game, while also using a portion of the profits to provide the funding needed to care for our nation's veterans. With Artillery Sports, it's more than just a game. So head over to artillerysports.com today to buy the quality equipment you need to keep you in the game and to help our nation's veterans at the same time. That's artillerysports.com. Make sure you head on over there today. Oh, and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at documentary filmmaking. I'm your host, Christian Taylor, and a documentary filmmaker myself. I'm not sure where you are today or what day it is or what time zone you're listening to, but as we record today, it's Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025, and this is notable because it is 2 days after the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. And I'm drawing attention to this because it is a very intense and charged time right now here in the US and frankly in the world. And this is relevant to the subject matter today that we're going to be talking about because it is also a very intense and yet relevant subject matter to the time we're in. And also it is a very important subject matter to me. I have an amazing filmmaker here. Her name is Robin Hamilton. She's an Emmy award-winning television host, producer, and moderator for town halls and forums. She's a founder and principal of Around Robin Production Company, where she creates videos for nonprofits to help with fundraising and marketing messages. Welcome, Robin. It's really, really an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. We were talking a few minutes
Yeah.
behind the scenes, and I love talking to other filmmakers who really know their stuff, appreciate the craft. So I thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's like we found our people, It's so
Yes.
great talking to other
Yeah.
filmmakers. I do love
Y-
it.
Yeah.
Let me finish reading your bio, though,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I just want to get this in here. It's really impressive to me. Your production company has produced 5 films so far, including
hmm
This Little Light of Mine, The Legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, Dignity and Defiance, a portrait of Mary Church Terrell, Our Alexandria, and Odessa's Reign.
hmm
Working at the intersection of media and policy, Ms. Hamilton's work is guided by the principle of providing information that can promote transformation. Um, all right, and we didn't talk about the one that I just watched.
Oh, yeah. Resolved. Never again. I forgot to put that in there. That's
You
my
need to
newest
notice that.
one. So I know I need to update that one. That's about
Yeah,
the city of Alexandria.
yeah, which is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I just really have enjoyed that, and I also asked to watch the um, This Little Light of Mine, The Legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer,
hmm
which I'm so thankful you shared
hmm
that with me. It was
Oh,
super
yeah.
touching. It
Thank you.
really, as I told you before, it resonated because
hmm
she was from my home state of
Right,
Mississippi.
which was amazing. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
deceptive because you don't have an accent.
Well, I went to acting school. My first life is an actress, and
Yes.
so yeah, had to do that. But
Uh,
uh, I just was blown away because I didn't know her story,
mhm, mm.
and
Thank you for
I was
saying that. I mean, that's my goal is to kind of shout her story to the hills because she was such a remarkable woman.
she was, as it
Mm,
should be shouted. Now I'm getting ahead of myself
Oh, yeah.
because I want to learn a little bit more about you. I've now
Yes.
seen 2 of your films, and it
hmm
just made me super curious about who
hmm
you are and
Yeah.
how you got started in this whole crazy business, where you
So,
live, and just tell me all about you. Start from the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. So my background, I'm originally from Maryland. I live right outside of DC now, but I started out my career as a reporter. I was a local news reporter. And so I hopscotched up and down the East Coast. But what really started me on this role of being a filmmaker was when I was in undergrad. I took a class about women in the civil rights movement, and I was presented with a book, a number of books about amazing women. And one of them was This Little Light of Mine, the Life of Fannie Lou Hamer, written by Kay
Ah,
Mills. And that book was quite extensive and exhaustive about her life. And I was so moved by this woman who had a sixth grade education. She was forced to pick cotton, drop out of school and pick cotton at 12. And from there, she became this incredible powerhouse, a voice for the vote in Mississippi, and was really instrumental in helping get the Voting Rights Act passed. And it wasn't lost on me that like an African American woman in North Carolina at school, I mean, I was in, university because of women like her.
yeah.
And I was moved by her story, as well as so many other women in the civil rights movement who are unsung heroines, who packed the sandwiches and gave people places to sleep. And they did all of the grunt work for the bus boycotts and the sit-ins that people didn't give them credit for, passing out flyers, spreading word of mouth about where another activity was going to be, putting people up in their houses and being the hospitality for students who came down to help build coalitions to register to vote, to protest segregation. I mean, these women were the backbone of the civil rights movement, and they deserve so much credit. I would not be where I am today without women like them. And so this was my love letter to her. So I say all that because I say I first met Mrs. Hamer. That's where I read about her. Um, and I just fell in love with her. And I said, when I read this book, I want to do something about her. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know I want to do something with her. And she got into my soul. And so as I proceeded to go through school, initially I was an English major, and we had to do our senior thesis on something in the historical realm of civil rights, something of that nature. And I wanted to do it about North Carolina. Anyway, to make a long story short, I found a gentleman who had lived in Durham, and he used to go to this place called the Royal Ice Cream Parlor. And he was black at the time, and it was a white owned ice cream parlor. And he always had to go through the back, even though it was in his neighborhood. All the white kids, it was a good ice cream parlor apparently, and all the white kids could go in the front, but he always had to go to the back with his friends. So, to make a long story short, my thesis became about the desegregation of Durham, because when he became old enough, he worked hard, invested, and bought the Royal Ice Cream Parlor and turned it
Wow.
into a soul food joint,
Oh,
which
that's
I thought was
cool.
cool, right? And so I thought stories like that kind of got my piece became a journalistic piece instead of a historical academic piece, because I was interviewing living history.
Hmm.
I didn't want to just be doing a very sterile academic piece. So that put me on the road to journalism. I loved interviewing people. I loved putting stories together. And so I became a reporter, moved up and down the East Coast. And then in Boston in 2004, I'm dating myself, but I went to the Democratic National Convention was held there at the time. And that's when actually Barack Obama spoke on the national
Hmm.
stage. But there was a small event celebrating Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. And I was
Really?
meeting people. Yes. So that's what I mean. She kept coming into my life. She came into
Wow.
my life. And after I had graduated,
That's
and
interesting.
years later, and I met this one gentleman, and he said, I had gone to jail. I was in jail with Mrs. Hamer. If you want to do something about her, let me know. And I said, I would love to. His name was Lawrence Guillot. And so years passed, and I said, you know what, I've got to do something. But life gets in the way. You're working, you're just trying to hustle. To make a long story short, I reached out to him, and someone told me, oh, he passed. He passed away.
Mm.
And it freaked me out because I thought, I got to grab these people now. I've got to interview as much as I can. And it happened more than one person who knew her well started to pass away. Howard Zinn is another one who is this great gentleman, an activist. I don't know if you're familiar with him, and
Mm-mm.
he's a writer, white guy in the 60s, going hand in hand, protesting with people. Another really remarkable brilliant soul who passed away. And so I
Mm.
was watching these amazing people who were threads to her past. And so I said, I need to do
She died
something.
early. She was
She
59
was
in
59.
'77, right? She passed away in
Exactly,
'77?
exactly. And so I just knew I needed to do something about her. So
Mhm.
finally, I bit the bullet and said, I have I have journalistic experience, but I don't have filmmaking experience. But I'm just going to do it, and I'm just going to treat this as a journalistic story.
I know what that's like.
You know, right? I remember you said that, and I just said I'm going to do it, and that's how I got one small grant. I had applied for multiple grants. I got rejected. I didn't have any
I know what
connections,
that's like
and
too.
right. And but I just said I believe in her, and so even if this just gets shown at a library at a school, I'll be happy just so I can put it out to the world. And it ended up doing much better than I ever imagined. It was in film festivals, it was on PBS nationally. People still
Oh,
watch it
that's
and
great.
they're still learning about her. Yeah, so that really makes me happy. But that's kind of the long answer of how I started off as a journalist and ended up doing this film about her. And then I just, along the way, I just kept finding stories that about remarkable people in history. People ask me, "Oh, you only do black stuff, and you only do-" It's I don't look at it as I only do black stuff. I do work about people who are often underestimated and ignored in history, who have done amazing things, who
Yeah,
deserve to be recognized.
yeah, yeah.
And so I'll find something someone will get under my soul and under my skin, and I'll just be determined to do something about them because I believe these people deserve to be recognized.
Well, I mean, I think that's amazing, and I don't think that it
Thank you.
matters that you do just, African American stories, and here's why.
Mhm.
Access is important,
Yes.
and your interviewers being comfortable with you is important,
Yeah.
and, making sure we don't lose these stories are important,
Yes.
and your stories oftentimes find you. So, I definitely don't think
Yes.
that you need to apologize if you're stuck
Thank
in a
you.
vein. I've had to make peace with that myself
Yeah.
because I keep getting stuck in World War II
Yeah,
stories,
right.
and I
You're
keep
right.
wanting to, I know I can do something else. I think
Mhm.
actors must feel the same way,
Yes,
I keep getting
yes.
the same roles, but once you, are in this vein or you find you have a knack for this storytelling, those things do begin to find you, and
Yeah.
one story leads to another, et cetera, or
Yes.
once you've gained archival footage, all of a sudden you
Yes.
have this breadth of knowledge and you
Yes.
become have a deeper, you can tell a deeper story the next time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I do see that, in your work for sure.
Mhm. Thank
So
you.
your most recent work that I watched was a longer piece.
Yes.
And there were more people, that you were able to interview, and it was a much
Yes.
more detailed, varied types of media used. It was just a little bit more
Yes.
complex. And so,
Yes.
talk about just your evolution as a filmmaker.
Uh-huh. Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's funny because I do shorts, and my films are usually my shorts are between my shortest is 16 minutes, my longest is a half hour. And a lot of that is from my news background
Right.
in that, you think about people's attention span, you think about what people have, just they're able to digest especially if it's a harder topic. But this came from the city of Alexandria because they're working on their equal justice initiative. And that initiative encompasses approaching and acknowledging a very difficult history of two lynchings that happened at the turn of the 19th century, and how the city had kind of covered it up for decades, hundreds of years, and how they not only want to resolve it, but do everything they can to make the city as inclusive as possible. So it's the time frame clearly is longer, and then also in terms of complexity, I used sketches
Yeah.
because there are no pictures. There are no
Right.
pictures of the two victims,
Right.
and I didn't want to just have um, generic video or pictures of buildings, or there is some of that, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to bring it to life in a way that was tangible, and I used pencil sketches, because there's something about the sketching of a child that shows a little
That's
innocence.
what you didn't lead with, like, you're
Yeah.
burying the lead here. The lead, you should know this as a news reporter, the lead here is that what you did was you had the young men that were lynched at 16 and
Yes.
wrongly lynched,
Yeah.
you had them, their stories read by
Yes.
young men who were their
Yes.
age, young Black men who were their
Yes.
age, and, the drawings, did they draw the drawings, or were they other
No, it
children?
was another artist.
Yes, so
Yeah.
they were also, you could tell they were drawn by young kids, and so
Yes.
those pairings were very powerful, I thought,
Thank
because
you.
you saw, not only were you doing the documentary, you weren't just documenting what the city was doing, you were showing that the city was documenting this history, that they were, making sure that it wasn't forgotten. You also were demonstrating how the citizens were uh, accepting responsibility. I love how you
Yeah.
interviewed the policeman of
Yes.
right then, of
Mhm.
2023, saying our department was party to this, and
Right.
we are going to take responsibility here.
Exactly.
And then you decided to involve the children. So Alexandria was saying, yes, we're going to teach this in our schools, but you went one step further to say, hey, let's get the children involved in this documentary so they can show us what they're learning. And I loved
Yeah.
you not only had them read it, but you interviewed the young gentleman
Yeah.
who read what he said, I think.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow,
Yeah.
this is really
Thank
chilling
you.
for him.
Oh my god. See, this is what happens when you're talking to another filmmaker
Yes,
because
yes.
they pick up on that. Thank you. I appreciate that. But that's exactly why I did that, because in a way, not only does it bring it all together, but it shows you how layered this
Yeah.
is. Just every aspect of the city is impacted by this, can make a
Mhm.
change by it in their own specific way. So
Yeah.
whether it's law enforcement, a historian, a student, I mean, I was so touched when the student said, it makes me think this guy was my age, and he never got to do the things. He never got to explore what he could have been.
I know, I was so
Right.
emotional when I
Right.
heard that, and the other gentleman that really touched me, and I'm so sad to say I
Mm,
forgot his name,
yeah.
I was so caught up in the emotion of the moment, was the gentleman who said his mother owned property in, North
Ah,
Carolina, and
yeah.
he went back to Alabama to the center of,
Yeah.
tell me the name of the, um,
Oh, yeah, it's the equal
rec
justice.
equal
Yeah,
justice
like the reconciliation center where they
reconciliation,
have,
yes,
right.
in Alabama,
Mhm.
and he went down there. His mother would never ever go back to North Carolina. He didn't
Right.
know why, she wouldn't talk about
Right.
it. He went there with a group of students because he's a history teacher, and
Mhm.
he found a relative's name there, and if people have never been there, they had these very dramatic, not
Like
statues,
pillars, like,
yeah, they're pillars
suspended
that are
pillars, right.
hanging as if,
Yep.
they're being lynched, to, remember those that were lynched, and
Yeah.
he had a relative's name there, and so he called his mother and says, "Is this why you wouldn't go back to North Carolina?" And she said, "Well, now you know, and I'm still
Mhm.
never talking about it." And,
Mhm.
he was just so passionate about that whole experience and how it just, was it just so had missed him. Here he was just like the second generation. And
Yeah.
all of that experience, because his mother could never talk about it, and because he really never grew up studying it, just was over his head. And, he had grown up with the, notion of, the Great Migration, as we all
Right.
had. But
Right.
truthfully, what he realized was it wasn't the Great Migration at all. It was,
Exactly.
they were fleeing being slaughtered,
Yeah.
and,
They were
it's
fleeing
just
terror. Yeah.
right. So I learned that for the first time in your
Mm.
documentary, and
Oh, thank you.
so that was beautiful. And so what I wanna get to the heart of here, and, I'm doing all the talking, which, I mean,
No, no,
really
no. no, this is wonderful.
but I learned so much, and what I, um, wanted to talk about more than anything else here is this art of storytelling. So,
Mhm.
I look at your story of, like, I was moved back in college, I met this woman, she
Mhm.
stirred my soul, I have to tell her story and introduce her to the
Yeah.
world. Along the way, I learned these other things that really changed me, changed how I lived and
Yes.
the person I became. And I want others to know these stories. And now you're sharing these stories at a pivotal time in our society. So, like I said, I mentioned that we're 2 days past the inauguration of the 47th president. It is probably one of the most difficult times I have ever remembered.
Hmm.
And, I told you earlier in this podcast, this is a brave thing for me to do in a sense to talk about this subject matter because I come from the segregated South,
Hmm.
and I grew up in a segregated situation in Laurel, Mississippi, where I remember only white kids in my classes, and it wasn't desegregated till I was about in middle school. And, I have so many stories. The head of the Ku Klux Klan was part of my church and lived down the street from my house. And I'm humiliated to
Mm.
think about my roots. And when I saw your film, it was very, very difficult for me to watch that without emotion, and it brought up a lot of those thoughts and feelings, and it reminded me of where we are today in
Hmm.
that I've heard a lot of the same rhetoric that I heard a as a child
Mm.
in whispers, but now I see it on TV or I read it in the news, and it scares me. It scares me for the
Hmm.
Jewish community. It scares me for the people of color.
Hmm.
And, um, so I feel like for you, it's very brave, to
Hmm.
come out and do pieces like this. I feel like for the town of Alexandria, it's very brave, and you
Hmm.
did this in 2020 to 23. I wonder, are they still doing this today? Are they still allowed to teach these things in classes, or is that going to change?
Hmm.
We just, had an executive order 2 days ago that was passed that now the military bases, I think, have to revert back to the names of the Confederate, um, you know,
Oof, I had not
generals,
seen that. Oh.
that they were before. And ironically, for me, it's much easier for me to call it Fort Benning or, you know, than it was, than it is Fort Moore. And there's a whole bunch of reasons I'd rather keep it the same simply because it's easier for things to say the same. But it's not right. And
Hmm.
so I just think about your how brave you are, to
Thank
tell
you.
these stories, and I wanna talk about that.
Hmm.
When you are in the middle of a time like this, and you have this hot subject matter, and or even as a news person,
Hmm.
and you think about, "Should I or should I not step into this fray and put my life or my reputation on the line?" Talk to me about that decision-making process,
Hmm.
and have you ever been in situations where you thought, "My it's not worth it?"
Hmm. Well, I honestly, first of all, Christian, I think you need to applaud yourself though for being who you are and doing what you're doing, and
Thanks.
even taking the time to have me on and to be the voice that you are for so many people and for standing up for what's right. So one of the things I will say is there's pockets of resistance. When you mention Alexandria, they just elected their first African American female, a woman mayor, which is
Wow.
huge.
That is
Yeah.
huge.
And so the fact that they want to continue, the initiatives of equal justice that I just spoke at their MLK event, that says to me that there is a dedication to do that. Um, and so I was talking to, when we were earlier, I was talking about this older African American woman who recently passed, and I had said I was so sad about the state of things. And she said, "You have to do what you can do to continue to push things forward in the right direction. And you can do that in whatever way makes sense for you." And so for you, Christian, you do it by, again, being this voice, having this platform, giving me a space to say these things. Is it difficult? Absolutely. Absolutely, it's hard. I mean, I got a lot of resistance when I used to work in the newsroom in Boston.
Mm,
There were some great opportunities I had, but there were some people who did not want me there, who were very subtle and not so subtle about making it clear that they did not think that I should be in an anchor seat. And that's why being independent, for example, has helped in many respects. But you have to find your way to make a way, if that makes sense. You know, it's interesting. A professor had invited me to speak at a university last year, and the powers that be did not want me there. And so there was this nasty push and pull. And finally, I said to the professor who had invited me, you know what? I just don't think this is going to work. You know, and there were a couple of universities that were like that. And so you ask if I've hit resistance. I have, but there's also a part of me. I go through waves of grief where there's a part of me that's sad, and then there's another part that says, "All right, get up, keep going." Mrs. Fannie Lou would have told you to get up
yeah,
and keep going, because that's what we have to do. If they did all the things that they did for us, then I think I can, with all the opportunity, my education and the opportunities that I have, I don't have an excuse not to keep going. And there's consistent slights and petty, you know, petty things that people do to tell you that your work doesn't matter. But um, you know, you have to just keep pushing. You know, and that's I can't believe that I'm not going to fall for the "it's not worth it," because that's what they want you to think.
sure.
They
Well,
want you to be quiet and go
sure.
away.
And this podcast really is for those people out there, the documentary filmmakers out there who have a story that's controversial and doesn't have to be about race, or it
Hmm.
could be about vaccines. It could be
Yeah,
about,
right.
any subject matter whatsoever that's touchy or scary, or I think it is important to find that inspiration. I mean, Fannie Lou Hamer is a wonderful, wonderful example. I don't know, is that little film out there for people to watch? Can people see
Yeah,
that?
they can go to my website aroundrobin.com, and they
Okay.
could go to films, and you'll
We
be able
will
to
link
see
that.
it.
I really do
Yeah,
think people
thank
ought to
you.
watch that because I think she's just inspirational for anyone,
Hmm.
as are so many people in that civil rights movement, because, and I think particularly of the white people that I know who stood with the Black people who were desperate to
Yes.
get their rights, and I think
Yes.
that is what it's going to take today. Not just, it's whoever is in the majority power, whether it's, when the racial issues rise, it's the white people who stand with the people of color.
That's right.
It's our responsibility. It's incumbent upon us, I feel,
Hmm.
to be able to lead the way. And
Absolutely.
whenever you have that power, I think it is to be able, to use it for the good of others. And
Hmm.
so I just think the only way that we can do that is to look at people like Fannie Lou or others
Hmm.
who have endured such horrible things, in
Yeah.
order to advance what is right. And I shared
Yes.
with you earlier the little quote in my home growing up, which
Mhm.
is so simple and, trite maybe, but true, that if you don't stand for something, that you will fall for anything. And
Exactly.
I think standing for what is right, um, is the right thing to do
It is.
all the
That's
time.
and you have to use that as your compass and your guide. I mean, because I just even think about the times where maybe I didn't stand up for just something trivial or whatever, and you feel it in
Yeah.
your heart. You just feel, you know what?
You
I
feel
could have
yucky
done
because you
better.
compromised or you didn't do that.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. You feel like you compromised.
And if you have the voice or the power as a filmmaker, I think that, you have a responsibility, to do what you can. And
That's
I
right.
think what's hard in my situation, I was telling you this earlier, I feel like I have the ability to tell stories and I have the
Mhm.
desire to tell stories,
Yeah.
and I am waiting for that moment. Like I was telling you, I've been dying to tell the story of the 688, so I've researched it. I've
Yes.
done a blog,
Uh-huh.
and I was working on a documentary, and then all of a sudden this Netflix film came out, which
Yes.
I was so happy about that I was like, well, at least their story is out, and I'm sure
Mhm.
someone will do a documentary probably better than I can. But you do have
No.
to find the resources and
That's
fight
right.
to make it happen.
That's
And
right.
so if you are listening to this right now and you have a story and you are discouraged, don't quit. Don't quit. Don't
Yes.
be discouraged by being stuck where you are, or don't be afraid by people that tell you, this is not a wise thing to do, or it could get you in trouble, or you have
Right.
to be brave.
It's really true. I mean, I'm telling you, I had no business doing a film. I'll tell you this really quickly. I went to a film festival and you meet buyers and distributors. This was years ago, 7, 8 years ago. And I remember was one of the few brown people there. And I say that because I went to this one gentleman who was at a network and I told him about Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. And he looked at me derisively and said, "We're only interested in things that sell." Like this story was a bunch of garbage. And it's not the first time that the stories that I have my film archive, someone has told me that it is worthless.
Mm,
And the irony though is when I didn't listen to these people, these films ended up doing much better than I ever imagined, whether it be winning awards, whether it be being televised nationally, whatever it may be. So that's what I say that because don't listen to people because who are they to tell you that something is worthwhile or not? Who
yeah.
are they?
I take such incredible inspiration from the Black community because I
Yeah.
look at what they have endured, from the moment they were put on slave ships and stacked on top of each other to come over here, and, what they endured. And, I just think about it all, because I grew up with that. I didn't learn those stories when I was little, but I have seen the effects of those from the
Yeah.
time I was a kid, and I have read about them, and I've studied them, and I've listened to stories now of people that grew up in that horrible situation, and I see those effects today. I've read about it as I've done these World War II films where, these GIs were segregated and they never got the GI Bill and they did
Right.
not have access to housing and home loans. And because of that, they never had the wealth that the white soldiers had. And I look at this and my heart breaks because it's not right. And
Hmm.
I just the one thing I tell you that is missing from the Alexandria film, and it isn't your fault, but it's that, you have the police officer saying, "Our department did what was wrong." You have the city saying, "The city did what was wrong." And they're all white.
Mhm.
And you have the Black families coming and saying, "We do forgive you. Thank
Yeah.
you for this." And, really, there's no money being exchanged. There's just
Right.
a
Correct.
conversation. It's just,
Correct. It's a
let's talk about
conversation.
this and
That's
let's
right.
not forget this. And it's very symbolic, but it's also very healing. And, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. No one's losing here,
Exactly.
and so
Exactly.
it's a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
And but the only thing that was missing for me was I wish that the white landowners, those families could have participated in that. And maybe they just didn't know. Maybe they weren't, maybe nobody researched their history and they didn't know and they didn't have the opportunity. And maybe that's something that people should think about, you
Yeah.
know? Because
Yeah.
maybe if the white landowners were given an opportunity, but maybe they wouldn't want to know. Or maybe
Well,
I've
e
heard white people say, I that wasn't me. That may have
ex
been my ancestors, but that
but
wasn't
that
me.
wasn't me. But it's interesting you say that because when I was doing my Fannie Lou Hamer research really quickly, I reached out to the plantation where Mrs. Fannie Lou used to live, the Marlowe family, and they did not want to talk to me.
Oh,
But
is
what
that
I
right?
did, they did not want to talk to me. But what I did notice is that I don't know if it was his daughter, one of the relatives donated to a statue in Mrs. Hamer's name.
Interesting.
And so I thought that was a very lovely gesture because I do think there's some embarrassment. I do think there's some
So there
embarrassment.
is still a plantation and there are still relatives that do know the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's land now. I don't know how much land they own now. I don't know who owns it, but I researched who had made donations to the statue that's erected in Ruleville, and her name was on
well,
it.
that is
So
beautiful. I mean, I do think
yeah,
that is a very gracious thing, and
yes,
that is a little bit of a tribute. I
yeah.
applaud her.
Yeah, so it's tough because, you try to think back, it's like, you have this mix of embarrassment, shame, and how do you reconcile all of that internally?
I
Um,
don't know. I mean, yes, I know that, it was not my ancestors
right,
necessarily
right,
that did a thing. I mean, I'm not my ancestors. I
right.
did not personally do anything. But
That's
guess
right.
what? I personally, unfortunately, have racism inside of me. I know it. I've thought racist thoughts. I
But we've
hate to
all thought negative thoughts. We've
I
all
hate to
thought.
admit that. Like I have to catch myself all the time because I'm human. And I'm
Mhm.
a sinful person, and they're wrong, and I have to sit here, and it's not just about it can be about anybody.
Yeah. But we all have some type of fault or prejudice or whatever about it could be age, it could be
Yes,
where
exactly.
someone's from, it
Weight,
could be
it could be
whatever. Wait, it could be
anything.
anything. And so what matters is what are you doing with that information? And you have the insight to say, you know what, that's not who I want to be. That's not what I'm about.
All I can
That's
do, yeah,
huge.
is take responsibility for me
Yes.
and try to, you know, notice in myself what needs to be changed and,
Yeah.
you know, try to ask the Lord to forgive me and make
Yeah.
me a better
Yeah.
person and
Yeah.
live and stand for something and do what is right. And,
Yes.
I applaud you for doing the same and
Oh,
telling
thank
stories
you.
that we should hear and being brave. And I do hope that people that are listening to this podcast will take inspiration from what you have done. We'll take
Thank
time
you.
to watch your films on your website. We will put a link
Thank
for
you.
that. And we'll also learn a little bit from the people that you have interviewed and
Thank
dig
you.
more deeply into Fannie Lou Hamer. I think she's pretty amazing. We'll
Thank you.
maybe link the book too. If you can send us the link to her little biography or any other books you want us to read.
Oh, sure.
Because,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Also, did you come ready with a documentary to a recommendation to share with us? One of your
Uh,
favorite documentaries? We do a
um,
DocuView Deja Vu segment.
oh, wow. Well, I know this is kind of heavy. So I could do
Okay.
two
So,
things. I could
all right. So
mention,
wait a second. We have to do the
okay.
introduction. Okay.
Okay.
Now we are entering into everyone's favorite segment, DocuView Deja Vu. All right. It's your turn. Tell us some documentaries you love.
All right. So I'll do two. One is kind of self-promoting because I love my work. My documentaries are like my children. I love them so much.
That's
So
perfectly fine.
one is Odessa's Reign. It was about a black lesbian gangster in the 1950s who ran
Hmm.
a lucrative numbers ring in Washington, D.C., and became
Okay.
a millionaire. And I love her story just because she was this black woman who broke all sorts of stereotypes and boundaries. And my issue is I'm not glamorizing crime, but I'm telling the story of this woman, but who's brilliant. What could have happened if she had been given an opportunity? So it's about leaving. What happens when you leave talent off the table, when you leave
Mhm.
talent behind? And she grew this huge underground economy. So anyway, I was fascinated by this woman. The other documentary I really liked was Ava DuVernay's The 13th. I don't know if you saw
I have
that.
not seen that.
It's so powerful. And it's about the prison pipeline and
Okay.
the history of um, how really the system is built to keep Black and brown people basically in like modern day slavery. And who has the power, who profits off of the prison system. I was so moved by it. I actually volunteered for like Catholic relief services afterwards to help people who are leaving prison to get back into society. I mean, I was that moved. I mean, I was that moved because
Wow.
I wanted to give people a chance to get their life back, because it feels like a behemoth that you have to fight against.
Well, thank you for
So,
sharing that. I will check that out. Really, thank you
yes.
for your time today. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just been a pleasure to get to know you and to watch
Yeah.
your films.
Thank you.
It's just been great. I really,
It's
really appreciate
wonderful to talk
it.
to you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, you have
Yeah.
been listening to Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.